Good morning. Thank you all for joining us for the Mayor and City Council work session for Thursday, February the 4th, 2022. We have these scheduled each Thursday before we have a council meeting on the following Tuesday. Our goal for these meetings is to be able to have discussion about pending topics for the city so that we can work together here without taking any votes, but in preparation for what we hope is always a very productive meeting on Tuesdays. We're glad that citizens are tuning in, and that if you have any questions or anything during the time, you can text it to the Facebook live feed, and we'll try to address those as well. If we can't do it during the work session, we'll try to reach out to you independently. At this time, before we get started, could I get Mr. Casey Bush to please come forward and give a prayer?
Let us pray. Again, oh gracious Father, once again, we just come giving you thanks, glory, and honor, God, for allowing us to be here today. And God, we thank you right now for this work section that we're about to have. We ask you, God, as we normally do, to continue to give your strength and your guidance, God, and your authority, God, just to continue to lead this city. We thank you right now for our mayor and our council, God. Continue, God, to bless them, God, with your wisdom and knowledge, God, that this city will be what you want it to be. It's these things we ask in your darling Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Council meeting, we earmarked $3 million to potentially use for watershed and flooding issues in the city. Our hope is to get matching support from the county and also leverage that money through the legislators in Jackson. I think it's been obvious that they have been sending a clear signal to cities and municipalities that this is where we can best leverage our money for infrastructure. One of the things I've talked to people about recently is that, to anybody. You just have to drive around the city right now and you can see many of those issues that our citizens are from. And in many cases, these are areas that have been dealing with this for quite some time. I know since I walked into the mayor's office in July, I have had many individuals reach out to me about the flooding issues that they face. And there are a lot of different reasons for the flooding that we have in a river town. I believe that Wagner Engineering is trying to do, the group that we hired for this work, are professionals in this area and have helped other communities in this area with this type of flooding issues. And so they're experts on their team that know how to deal with some of these issues. So my hope is that we will listen to their advice, that we will take into consideration that, yes, we don't have the money to fix every flooding issue in the city, but this has been going on for quite some time, and if we don't begin to tackle this, then when? And so I think it's been obvious that I have been stating from the very beginning, I think we need to try to leverage this one-time money as much as we can. I was just this morning on the phone with the president of the Board of Supervisors, and we were having a good discussion about, again, that the city is part of the county. The city residents pay county taxes. So this $11 million that we talk about coming to the county actually comes to the city as well, because our citizens are county residents, and we pay taxes in the county. And a lot of the flooding issues are starting from the county area and coming to the city. So I'm hoping that we can start over with a good discussion about how we can potentially work together on this. I don't want it to see it become a political issue or a county versus the city issue. That's not helpful for anyone. I also mentioned to Tripp again this morning that the Lieutenant Governor was very clear on this beginning in the summer at the MML meetings that city and counties are going to do better if they work together on leveraging this information. We now have a lobbyist in Jackson that is working with us on this topic, along with Wagner. I've been in consultation with both of those groups this morning, asking them to work together in Jackson to help us get this as much money as we can in this area and in other priority issues for the city. Both groups have told me they would be working together, and I have also emailed and had some phone conversations and text messages with our local legislators who are in Jackson that represent us in the House and the Senate, so that everybody is clear on what the city is trying to do with our ARPA money. So with saying all that, I asked Kevin Stafford to come today to address some of the issues that we have in flooding. They are extensive. They are not an easy, quick fix, but I think it's one that we should take seriously. One of the things I wanted to show before, as I mentioned earlier, I have been getting emails and videos since I entered office about the flooding areas. I have shown videos of areas within the inner city on 15th Street North and South that have terrible flooding. And then I also had one of the chaplains for the police department sent me a video that he shot recently this week, and he is also in this video. He is narrating what happens in the part of the city when this happens. So this is an example of where it's all over the city. And so if, Joe, can you run that for us so we can see it?
Yes, sir.
This video begins at Creekstone Marathon at the corner of Highway 45 North and Chapman Road. This is a perpetual flood area. At this very spot right here, I personally had to pull an elderly couple out of their car and put them on the tailgate of my truck to get them out of a flooded car. These are pictures of the current rainstorm. You can see that mud is over Chapman Road here. Going down the south side of Tractor Supply on Chapman Road, you can see that the ditches are at capacity, that the water has come over the road, coming out of Tractor Supply there. Chapman Road turns to the right and becomes Northdale Drive. Under range, you can see where the water has come across the road. Here, just coming onto Northdale Drive. I will say the city comes out here occasionally and cleans out these ditches, but the problem is that they're over capacity because the water comes across the road in several spots. This is the intersection of Janie and North. Water perpetually comes across the road here. This yard just south of Janie Lane is an area where the water comes across the road, and also the yard on the other side. This is at the intersection of Northdale Drive and Crescent Cove. Again, the water has been known to come across this yard. There's water standing here, and that's probably because there's a clog in this culvert in this yard that's close to the intersection of Brookwood Cove and Northdale Drive. This is, I guess, I think this is a sewer pipe. pump station here. The water is where these yards are routinely flooded in heavy rains. You can see that from last night's rain, this is Wednesday, um, February 23rd. You can see that in this yard, there's still residual water from last night's heavy rains. We're turning around and coming back down Brookwood Cove to Northdale Drive. Turning left on Northdale Drive here. Once we get past the intersection of Brookwood Cove,
That's the end of it.
Okay. And then we have another video that Councilman Beard is sharing as well. We appreciate that.
This is the center behind my house, the old community center. The water is up to my gate, it's high.
That's the end of it, Mayor.
Okay.
And that's obviously because from their brickyard, all that water coming from the brickyard, flooding the entire Memphis town community,
Mhm.
from Hughes Lane, 21st Street, 23rd, all the way up to 14th Avenue.
And we've gotten many messages about that area too. I mean, we can show them from all over the city. That particular area, there's some concern about the stagnation of the water there too, and how unhealthy it is around the houses, and then lots of concerns in that area that we need to address. But I think all the council probably could show different videos or messages they've gotten from throughout the city, which is just another reason why I know we all realize that this is very important. One of the things that I've talked to, and Kevin, you can come forward too if you will, sir. Kevin has been our city engineer for quite some time and is very familiar with all of these issues. He and I have gone out looking at them for quite some time. We've talked to the folks at Public Works about the needs for planning for cleaning certain areas at certain times of the year. There's a lot of different issues that are causing the flooding. We also want to try to do a better job of educating the community on little things they can do around their houses and stuff to help prevent some of this flooding. So it's something that we need to do as a team for the city. So with that, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Mayor. Mayor actually asked me to come today, and it wasn't on my calendar, so otherwise I'd have a full presentation and keep y'all here, and we'd probably all need lunch to talk through the issues. But those videos did a great job of showing just a couple examples. And, you know, the 22nd Street area, 23rd Street area, if y'all recall, years ago, we designed actually some detention ponds on the brickyard. They were going to donate the property and ran into some wetland issues, about $65,000 worth of mitigation. And so that's what stopped that project at the time. I think the brickyard would still be on board flooding. Before I start getting into each individual issue and doing that, y'all know that the city had a study done back in '71. Y'all heard me reference it several times. And so even in that study, it addressed the localized flooding issues, which is what we've seen this past week. It doesn't have to do with the Lux getting out of its bank or the 10-time getting out of its bank, and the floodplain issues that the city also has to incur. And so if y'all remember the floods that came in about 2019, those were because of the backwater issues due to the larger water bodies that run through our city as well. So while we're blessed with the beauty of it, we also have the issues that come along with it. So we also have a couple major creeks that run through the city, in Magby Creek and Burning Branch Creek that turns into McCrary in the East Columbus area that floods routinely in areas that are also floodplain, and those tie into the Lux, and then the Lux ties into the Ten Tom, and all those confluences cause issues on a major scale. But again, what we're seeing right now is really localized flooding based on the high intensity of rains that we see. And the 71 study majorly addressed is where those issues are. And they took, and again, keep in mind, this is a 71 footprint as far as the city goes. We've annexed several times since then. So places like the video on Chapman Drive, they weren't even studied in 71. And so my predecessor, Joey Hudnall, during his time has been telling the city that we need to update our comprehensive master plan, because while it's important, while it does identify some major areas that needed to be addressed, it doesn't address the whole city. And so that's something I know that's been brought up recently and that we would strongly support. But on the localized flooding issues, there are some things that have been identified that through Public Works in the past years and decades for that matter have been tried to be addressed, from upgrades, but also just regular maintenance. And the mayor mentioned it. You know, there's pipes that almost washed out 2 days ago simply because of sticks and leaves that were in the ditch. You know, the city has an ordinance against or not allowing people to put their leaves in ditches, and obviously all it takes is a couple twigs, and just like a beaver that builds a dam, flowing water can do the same thing. Y'all have seen the flowing water in fences, and the leaves catch it, and eventually it'll bowl over the fence. I mean, that's how bad it was. And just yesterday, we took pictures and sent in Councilman Green's ward of a pipe along Ridge Road that had cut out just because it couldn't get through the pipe, overcut it, and almost washed it all out. And so simple maintenance things like that we would encourage citizens to try not to do. I know Casey and his crews, you know, they have all they can say grace over as far as keeping things clean, especially being on the heels of fall and leaves being washed into the ditch. But the other thing that study did is it identified where the capacity of the existing infrastructure 50 years ago was undersized. And here we are 50 years later, much of which has not been addressed. And so, you know, while we need to upgrade those things, we also need to maintain what we have. It's just like your vehicle. Just because it breaks down doesn't mean you turn around and go buy a new vehicle. Sometimes you have to maintain what you have in order for it to work right. And the study actually said that. It said not everything's undersized. Some things need to be upgraded a little bit. And there are things that Public Works can do in-house. And so, but there's no surprise if you look at the 71 study and look at their rankings from, so to speak, worst to first, if you will. The areas that we see worst right now are the areas they saw 50 years ago that have not changed. However, like I said, areas like North Columbus that weren't in the city are not even making that list because they weren't reviewed then. And so I could sit here and go through their recommendations in order, and it's not going to surprise any of you. It's going to impact every single one of your wards. But the areas that we stood in, you know, waders and knee boots in the past, and you know, Casey, I remember Mike Pratt diving in on Chapman Drive when that, you know, inlet was swirling back in the day, and we told him, don't do that, you'll get sucked to it, obviously. And some improvements were made on Chapman Drive. What wasn't mentioned there is the house right behind the gas station used to go underwater almost twice a year. That hadn't happened since what we found was two things. There was a pipe along the north side of the road, and it had a water line that ran through it, and it had styrofoam from, I'm assuming somebody had opened a box and left it in the yard, and the styrofoam had gotten jammed up against the water line. Well, the pipe was removed, the water line was lowered, so it's no longer in the flow line. Obviously, the styrofoam was removed as well. So that's helped that situation, but the confluence of that coming into Highway 45 causes an issue, and we've made MDOT aware of it. It's their drainage. They would love to do something about it. And so, again, I could go through piece by piece, every single area of 22nd, 23rd issues. Yes, sir, go ahead.
No, while you're on that subject of right there, so that is MDOT that would solve that problem?
Correct.
That's not something we would address.
That's correct. It was put in as part of their drainage, and what's happening is in their inlet, when that water comes in from Chapman, you also have water coming from the north coming south, and it starts to swirl. And so all of a sudden it reduces the capacity of what that inlet can take in. And so what we've discussed is the potential of trying to take that water to the west side of the road as opposed to trying to turn it south. And y'all have seen what those ditches south do. So I'll never forget, I was at the house and during a rainstorm, it wasn't that major, and they said water's across Highway 45 in this area. And what we had found back when pool was there, one of their swimming pools got blown over the fence into the ditch and clogged up against the pipes that were there. And so things like that happen too. You know, basketballs in ditches, garbage can tops, we find those as well. I know Councilman Jones was telling me he pulled a TV out of a ditch this week. So, you know, you never know what you're gonna find, and those are unfortunate when they do happen. I don't think anybody does it intentionally, but sometimes just regular routine maintenance would help a lot. I know Casey and I talk about, one of the things that we were working on, and I think back to Councilman Box, he asked, you know, is there a list? Slap me if I go wrong here, right? Or correct me. So, but Casey has a list of streets where they know the major ditches are that they try to keep clean, but between manpower and equipment, they can't always get to it. And at that time, we were asked to help put together something a little more formal. And right now, that was halted because Casey and them were putting together their stuff. And so I just brought, and it's incomplete, but what we have done is basically take the entire city, taken my, of course, this is my version. It's about to fall apart. I probably need to reprint it. This is the 71 study. We use it all the time. Casey has the major drawings in the back, rolled up in the back of his truck, and we put them out on the hood pretty regularly when we're looking at certain things. It shows what's out there, what's existing. It's pretty accurate, and it shows what the intent of the drainage, which way each block's supposed to go. It's detailed in that regard, but it also tells what upgrades need to be made. So we're discussing an instance right now down on 2nd Street where an old pipe needs to be replaced, and that's identified in the 71 study of what it needs to be. And so now, granted, what was recommended in 71 would be inadequate for today's standards of how you model hydraulics and what recommendations need to be made. But again, it's a good guide to give you some precedence on what needs to be done in the priority and which you need to put it into. And so,
Hey, can you go back real quick to what Councilman Green brought up about working with MDOT? How well do we work with MDOT, and how historically, and what do we need to do to improve that if we do?
So MDOT has their Tupelo district where is where we go to here. The district engineers who we normally coordinate that with, but they also have a maintenance crew. We discussed in the past that everything south of Blue Cut, we would maintain. Everything north of Blue Cut, which is where Chapman is, they would maintain from a drainage standpoint. I talked to them as recent a few weeks ago, and they had 13 open positions in Lowndes County for maintenance people. Right now, they're having to pull people out of their other districts to come help. And so, I mean, there are other areas. In other words, Monroe County, he said he's having to send workers from Monroe County down to Lowndes County because they're lacking right now. So he said right now they only had 3 for Lowndes County to work, and they had 13 openings. That tells you how sorely staffed they are. So to get a lot of help from them right now, I think we'd be hard pressed. But nonetheless, in the past, the monetary capital improvement side for the drainage is where they come into play to say, hey, if we're going to change this and do a major drainage line, for instance, that goes across 45, that's going to take time and dime, if you will, to make happen. And so that's where we've tried to learn on them. But they've been good to work with. It's just they have other priorities.
So just to try to explain this a little clearer, with an incident like we just saw on the video, what would be our protocol in trying to work with MDOT to address this sooner rather than later?
Well, just you have to work through them. I mean, let's meet with them, talk to them, see what they can do. Priority-wise, they would tell us where we fall in line. I know streets are what they worry about first, and if it's not impacting.
So we don't really have we don't have an action plan on that either, right? We just kind of go when we hear about it and see it. That's kind of what I'm.
But they're aware of it, and so we can only force their hand so much. I mean, and besides communication of the issues that we'd like to see addressed, about as much as we can do for them. So we've asked several times for the ditches to be cleaned as well, and that hadn't happened either. So they've come and done some at times, but again, I think due to their short staffing, we don't get as much.
And it seems to me that would work kind of hand in hand with what you and I've talked about before, trying to have a cleaning project with and we've talked about this before, with Public Works, where they're periodically during certain times of the year when we know those ditches need to be hit, we probably need to add MDOT to that as well.
Correct.
So that we know that, so we can answer these questions when the citizens or when these kinds of things happen, or also get involved with getting in touch with MDOT and saying, because
squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah.
Now, as far as maintenance, though, not just that particular, area where MDOT is involved, there are companies that we can hire to come in and clean all these ditches, and then Casey and them might have a better chance of maintaining the ditches, because they clearly don't have the manpower to go around and clean all these ditches at one time. So can you look into getting some quotes from companies that we can hire that would come in and clean these ditches?
Yes, sir. That was kind of the intent of where this ditching plan was coming from, was that let's put together and identify all the areas that need to be cleaned, and then while Casey and Public Works can do what they can do, I've been back here 17 years, and I can tell you there's ditches on Highway 45 that haven't been touched in 17 years. And so with that said, Blue Cut and 45 didn't used to go underwater on a routine basis, and it does. And that's a maintenance issue. It's not like the pipes got smaller. They filled in over time now, and that's the problem. Just simply cleaning them out would probably help that situation. So that's just one example of many we can go throughout the city. So 22nd and 23rd, whether you can name it, silt is going to go downhill. It's going to settle out when the water slows down, and it's time over time going to continue to fill in. And so cleaning out those ditches on a routine basis is important. There's plenty of companies that would love to bid on, because it's really simple work to do. But when you don't have the manpower in-house and you have a lot of other things that you have to look into, a one-time good cleaning should last you a while if it's maintained properly. A lot of
What
ditches.
would that look like? What would a good cleaning of a ditch like that, just for people to know?
From a look or a cost?
I'm talking about to do it. What all is entailed?
Gotcha,
Making
so-
sure that a ditch like that is properly cleaned.
Right, so if y'all drive, and I'm gonna use 45, because all of us have driven 45, if you see where you have culverts going into businesses, and on the downstream side of that culvert, you see this washed out area that's always holding water, and then you see this hump on the downstream side of that. What's happening is the water's speeding up as it comes through that pipe. It scours out on the downhill side, it scours out all that silt, which then obviously becomes volatile in the water and settles back out. All of a sudden it forms a dam, and it starts to hold water, so you got a few things going on there. Now you're gonna start holding back water in that pipe, which is gonna soften your subgrade, which is eventually gonna make your driveway sink down. Secondly, it's holding water not only through that pipe, but further upstream until that high spot's taken out. That's a simple deal that we could all go out there in 5 minutes with a shovel and cut a notch in, and it would continue to flow. But those ditches need to be cleaned out from, let's just say, culvert to culvert, to have a smooth flow line to where that water continues on. When you do that, a lot of times, most of the design, if done correctly, keeps the velocity. That'll keep the ditches clean all by themselves. But when they start getting those high points and low points, that velocity slows down, which allows that silt to settle out, and all of a sudden, you have grass and trees and other things, high points that are being created in the ditch that all of a sudden cuts out on the capacity. That's a simple maintenance deal.
Now let me jump you to this section too. On 15th Street North, that runs by the W. South, going into Ward 1. Thank you. There's a lot of flooding right there all the time. Also, onto the W campus, right in front of the arts building for the Mississippi School for Math and Science, there's some type of sewage break there, where when we have rains like this, sewage is coming up. Raw sewage on that campus, has been for quite some time. How do we address that issue? That would be part of Light and Water, correct?
Correct. But Light and Water, and there's other areas, 23rd Avenue North, 22nd Avenue North, have some of those same issues, where people can't flush their toilets, have sewage backing up into their bathtubs. That's been identified by Light and Water as an important issue to address, to where, for whatever reason, years ago, people would accidentally, I don't think people do this on purpose, they would tie drainage lines into sanitary sewer lines, or sometimes the sanitary sewer lines break down enough to where the ditches and or the groundwater flow gets into those pipes. It's called I&I, that all of a sudden overwhelms, and all of a sudden you have more storm water in your sanitary sewer lines that back up into these houses. And so obviously that's an issue that you have to separate the two. And so what Light and Water does is they go around and they smoke test and camera these lines to figure out where that I&I is coming in. The smoke testing tells them where they have breaks in their line that need to be repaired, and then they back into where they need to make those repairs and how much is that going to cost. And so that's kind of where y'all have heard the $50 million issues. Not all of those are this singular issue, but they're all issues that need to be repaired. So there's sanitary sewer overflows that they have to document every time that happens. And so we've done it for them on 14th Avenue and MLK and 23rd and 22nd Avenue. And all that drainage that we're talking about right now, that's part of that issue. That also ties into the human health, safety, and welfare issue as far as the sewage goes. So, but to 15th, it's a pretty impressive basin. If y'all have never paid attention, Councilman Jones and I looked up over by Union earlier this week, and really that's at the top of that basin. And so if y'all understand kind of where 15th and military area is, that water starts coming out of the hills there and comes down that street. And that's actually the beginning of that basin. It runs all the way down 15th. Goes underneath Highway 182, continues. Y'all know where the police station, y'all seen the large ditches in the back? That's that same basin, all coming from that area up at Union. Comes underneath 182, goes underneath and around the railroad tracks, goes underneath College, and continues on down under Bell Avenue, and eventually gets on out of town, if you will, of the city. But that's a major drainage issue. And so what's happening at College and 15th right now is that intersection is actually lower than the top bank of the ditch that's flowing all this water. And so when that ditch gets full, because it can't get out downstream, it becomes a detention pond. for lack of better words. And so if you ever, next time you're there, I know Casey, y'all block it off every time it rains hard, but if you're ever there and if you look at that intersection underwater, look over at the ditch and you'll see the top bank. That's what it's acting like a detention pond. It's not that the water can't get out. It's actually coming back upstream and holding, if you will.
Would that be also causing the flooding that's on 15th North too?
Potentially, yeah, potentially. I hadn't specific, again, it starts at Union, or actually north of Union.
North is what he's talking about. That's what we went out.
Oh, yeah, no,
We determined that we needed
That's
another
right.
thing right there.
So short answer is no on that front. If you look on Union, about halfway up 15th, just north of 10th Avenue, there's inlets on both sides. And we went out the other day, they were fine, there was no water running to them,
Yeah.
but there's water running down the street. There's
Right.
additional drainage that needs to be put in further up.
So that's also then what's causing it on 15th South?
Correct. All that water's coming south. It's a very impressive basin that runs right through the heart of the old part of the city that I'm sure not only is it undersized, it's probably met its useful life, its shelf life, and deteriorating on itself. And so going back to our conversation about needing a camera so that we can get in there, Casey and them can get in there and clean it out all day long, blow it out all day long, but if it's broken down and needs to be repaired, that's a pretty large area to repair beyond Public Works' ability to do. And so that goes back to where your grants come into play to try to get that. I mean, definitely the ARPA money to leverage for fixing drainage is imperative, especially when you have the opportunity to leverage it with multiple matching sources. So I've always used the example, if y'all remember, another bad area that was on our focus was from 22nd, 23rd, all the way down to Prokes Park. It was a $15 million drainage issue that we went to the Corps of Engineers, and we didn't lobby, but others lobbied for 592 funding. And we asked for 15, they gave us 6, us being the city. At that time, the city only had enough matching funds to leverage about $1 million of that 6. So we, at that time, turned away $5 million, so to speak, of free money because we didn't have the match to go with it. Now, that money was used to do 14th Avenue, and y'all see that ditch. And then, of course, luckily with the Kerr-McGee settlement, we were able to upgrade 7th Avenue and all the ditches in between, but we still have done nothing upstream of 14th Avenue. That still needs to be done. Now, the way drainage works, you need to start at the downstream end, because what you don't want to do is if you have a problem at one place and you fix it there, and all of a sudden you just move the problem further downstream. And so you want to start at the downstream end and start working upstream. And as you do that, so I'll use the example of College and 15th. We wrote a BRIC grant at the city's request in January of last year. It's about $4.6 million. It's a FEMA grant, but it was going to basically take from College Street and that basin right there by the Juvenile Detention Center and run all the way down to Bell Avenue, which is the last place you have, so to speak, housing. And we're going to upgrade all of that to get that drainage downstream out, which will help everything else upstream. So that's just one example, and that was a 20% match on that grant. But the unfortunate side of the BRIC grants is they're very competitive. You know, the people that were awarded last year were in the neighborhood of, you know, $14, $15 million up to $40 million, and they were, you know, were competing with New York City and towns in California that have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people actually flooding. Whereas here we may have properties, and you know, years ago, I'll use Masonic Subdivision as an example. It was studied, everything from putting the lake, I've heard referenced in Alabama, and of course, the consortium at that time with the Links help that was trying to put together just said thanks but no thanks. We don't want to cooperate on this right now. Corps of Engineers studied that same basin in 1986 and came back and basically said, sure, some improvements can be made to make this better. Some of the houses that are built are in the floodplain, and it would be cheaper than rerouting the ditch or doing these improvements just to buy the properties. And so since then, the city has gotten 3 or 4, they don't run through our office, but 3 or 4 repetitive loss grants through FEMA and have bought those houses. I always reference, most people remember R&N Furniture that was right across from Country Kitchen. That property was bought through that grant because it had flooded. So again, and that grant has some issues in that it will only buy residents and commercial businesses that are on FEMA's flood insurance program. So if you're on private insurance, it wouldn't qualify, but still, that's just one way they look at it. It's cheaper to buy the building than it is to make the drainage improvement. But
It has to be held and kept as green space. And
correct.
all that stuff.
Yeah, you pretty much put a conservatory on it. You know, you can't do anything with it at that point. So we actually used the property recently so that the Tombigbee River Valley Water Management District could store riprap there while they were making improvements to Magby Creek. But we still didn't just say buy the property and move on. If y'all recall, the city had an NRCS grant, which they put 3 secondary overflow pipes across Gardner Boulevard to help alleviate that flooding issue. And to my knowledge, since that's been done, the neighborhood neighborhood has not gotten as bad of water, even though we've had some more intense rains as it used to. You used to be able to take a boat through there, so it has improved it though.
I have a question regarding the Tombigbee River Management Valley thing. Where are we on their projected plan of action for, I know they've been down, we all went, stood on the ditches and looked, but are we on their calendar?
Yes, ma'am. I'm actually meeting with them next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. If y'all recall, y'all accepted the easements for Chateau de Holly Hills, and so they actually emailed this week and said, hey, we want to look at it. You know, the work order's been put in by the county. The easements are in place. We want to meet on site before we go to work. I met with Richard Herring for 4.5 hours and walked those 4 different areas that we had looked at: North Haven Woods, Willow Point, obviously Chateau de Holly Hills. Oh, another one's slipping my mind right now. North Haven Woods was the long one. Yeah. And so at any rate, we walked every ditch. He knows where and what needs to be done with each of them. And so he's putting together a work order with cost estimates for the county so that they know what the cost is going to be. And there'll be a discussion. My understanding is the county has said right now they don't think they're willing to pay what it would cost to buy the riprap and other things to make those improvements. In the past, the county has participated where the city would write the easements. The city would provide any manpower, any trucking that Public Works can provide. The county would buy the material, riprap, whatever's required, and obviously be the one to engage the district. And then the district would do all the work. And so that's kind of how all three had skin in the game in the past. So I think that's still up for discussion. Chateau de Holly Hills, I haven't had any requests yet from the county as far as covering the cost, but I think that's the discussion we're going to probably have on Tuesday. So they're all in motion. The old saying is, I guess, beggars can't be choosers. I wish they were here tomorrow. But we always know that Highway 69 was an area that we had and waited for probably 3 years for them to get to because it was so large. But when they're here, they do the work. So it's free work, but you kind of get it when they can get to it. And obviously, they're working in the entire Tombigbee Basin, which is a large basin. And they have a lot of people with their hand out, if you will. And they work through the county. So it's just one of those we have to get in line. And the county themselves have obviously issues they would like for them to address, much less the 4 we have before them. So I hope that helps.
Back to maintenance. Can you put that on the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Particularly for us to give you approval to go out and get bids on what it may cost.
Yes, sir. And what I would
I
like,
think that's something that we can see now that, would help solve some of these issues right now.
I think if I had to put a number to it, 60-70% of your issues would subside just through a good maintenance, a good cleaning, and then keeping them clean after that. Be glad to help work with Casey and his crews and put together his list of what he sees versus what we put together. And what we put together is in conjunction with the 71 study. But obviously I want to expand beyond that boundary that they had. And so our mapping includes already going beyond that boundary so that we can start to put a really full plan together. But I think long term, from a priority standpoint, y'all need to also look at updating that comprehensive plan, drainage plan that is, so you kind of know where your priorities are. And again, I'll give you the list. I'm gonna go through it quick, because again, I told y'all I could spend all day. Their top 4 priorities were all in East Columbus in 1971. Streets of Hemlock on the west end, Browder on the west end, some of that ditching, and if y'all remember along the high school on the north side of Hemlock, the concrete ditch that's there. That was put in as part of that priority that came out of that 71 study. So some things have been done. However, you go upstream to the east and you go behind the athletic complex and you go all the way down to Ramunda, you know good and well what flooding's going on there. That was the number 1, that was the number 2 issue. It's all related, it all ties together in the 71 study. So that's number 2 is the Ramunda and Hemlock area. Number 3 is the Lawrence Drive and Poplar area. We put in the detention pond at East Columbus Gym. Lawrence Drive, y'all have approved making some drainage upgrades there. Beach, it goes the opposite direction, some improvements there. So again, that was the number 3 issue. Number 4 is Maxwell and Browder. And y'all know what happens at Maxwell and Browder as it goes over to the Lux as well from the east side. I don't think any improvements have really been made there. They've been discussed, and we've discussed detention ponds right there at North McCrary and Forest Hill. And so, no, Forest Glen, that's right. And so anyway, that was number 4. Number 5 on the list is that big basin I was talking about, 15th Street, that goes all the way down to Bell Avenue, that starts up at Union. So that's a major issue, and it is today. We've all stood out and seen it. I'm going to do your top 10. How about that? Number 6 is going to be over at the Brickyard in 23rd and 22nd. Again, we've talked about it. We know it's there. We've met with them several times. Number 7 and 8 are kind of all tied together. It's on the south side of town from 11th Street to 15th Street along Pickensville, that kind of southwest area of the city. 31st Avenue and Chubby Drive, along with Brandon and Hospital Drive, Mayor, we've stood out there and we've seen all that drainage. That was priorities number 9, 10, and 11. And so, and then you go on from there, number 12 was 6th Street and Moore's Creek. And so, you know, how many times have we been out to those? Not as often, but you can tell those top 10, we routinely go out and see. Now there's others that are out there, and like I said, this list doesn't include Chapman Drive, which we know floods as well.
So what I just heard is 4 out of the top 5 are in my ward, so obviously 4/5 of the 3 million can go to Ward 3.
You're taking the city-county approach?
That changes.
All kidding aside, when you say priorities, this is based on the total amount of water or people affected? How do you come up with what's number 1 and what's number 9?
The undersizing of the pipes that's carrying the basins that's coming to it. They looked at what was out there, who was flooding, and then they looked at what was supposed to be there to carry the water, and they said, you're flooding because this is undersized. This is where you need to make physical improvements, not cleaning improvements, not maintenance, but physical improvements to upgrade and make sure this water can get out of here.
Well, it's my understanding, because I've been out to East Columbus several times, people have called me out there, and a lot of those neighborhoods probably should have never been put there before correct? Is that, I mean,
not necessarily put there, but the design is poor from 2 fronts. The streets are too wide.
Well, what I'm saying is it should have been, the infrastructure should have been in a better.
That was my second point. The infrastructure, everything surface flows, and the streets are too wide, which is way more impervious area than you need. So you take what a grass area where 90% of what hits it goes into the ground you never see, and you all of a sudden make it a wide street, whereas now only 10% is going to actually, so to speak, be impervious.
There are houses out there that have water standing in those yards so much they have mold in their house.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
it's super flat.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of underground drainage, and then when it does get to the ditches, when the ditches get full and they can't get out and get downstream, at the end of the day, they become.
Is that they're trying to get the infrastructure done correctly down here in Burns Bottom before they build there. It was not done out there, obviously.
Correct. Burns Bottom has the fortune of being on a hill, so I don't know that
Yeah,
we'll ever trap water there. But
no, that's
you
not,
know,
that's
and if you want to add insult to injury, if y'all have ever looked at a topography map of the city of Columbus, it looks like a brain, if you will. And everything in Katy Hills and the Fox Run area, Fox Run is what pushes out down Chapman, it rushes out of those hills. Well, then all of a sudden, what does it hit? A bunch of flat land and areas where all these ditches are and all the creeks are. And so it has nowhere to go. And so it has to sit there until it can get in. So again, what we're seeing right now is localized flooding. It has nothing to do with the confluence with the 10-time or the Lux, but that happens too. And so, yes, sir.
Let me ask you a realistic question. I mean, y'all can get that out the way. Can $3 million fix all of these issues?
Do you know the answer to that?
All right, then. So are you, as your company, as our city engineer, will you still be able, regardless of what this other company is doing, will you still be able to go and get these problems quoted and fixed for us? And because what I asked about the $3 million, I mean, you're looking at $3 million being matched with nothing from the county, quote unquote. That's $6 million, not even go pinch the majority of these issues that we have. So from a long-term standpoint, that's what I get from this other company, like they want to stay long-term, and we're not even going that direction because we have a city engineer. So what I'm asking is, the work that you already have that's in place, can we go ahead and start working on some of these things? Because we will have to apply for grants from other people, not from the state or through the ARPA funds. We will still need to get these things did. So.
Absolutely, but like I mentioned earlier, taking what funds you have, if drainage is the priority y'all want to put ARPA funds for, that gives you the best setup to leverage that between state and county organizations you can work with. Now, the other side of that coin is there are grants out there you can leverage that money with as well. The problem with a lot of grants is, one, they're competitive, and two, they take time to get through. And so prioritizing what you have is the first and foremost. The mayor mentioned it earlier. It won't tackle everything, but if you make, I always say, you make a difference to one person, it's worthwhile, and it is. And so, but you also have to look at, all right, who am I helping? Am I helping one business, let's just say? Is it cheaper, is it better to spend $4.5 million to help one business, or is it better to spend $250,000 and just buy the business? And that's the FEMA approach they take sometimes. That's a hard decision to make. That's a hard conversation to have. But I think that's where you're not only leveraging your money, making the smartest decision of where to put it. So are the lives and the homes of somebody that has sewer backing up into their toilets and their bathtubs more important than a street that has to be inconvenienced and shut down for an hour or two till the water subsides? So those are discussions we need to have and make sure the money gets put to where it's most wisely spent. We're gonna work with anybody and everybody that we can to get this where it needs to go, whether it's working with Wagner or your lobbyist or y'all and sitting down, the county, the state organizations that are out there. That doesn't matter. The information's out there, the knowledge in this city to know where to put it. Now it's a matter of
Well, I
getting
think you
it.
said that very well, Kevin, because I don't think this is a us against them
No,
kind
not
of
at all.
thing. This needs to be everybody that we've got at the table now working together. And I think that's what we're trying to do with these types of discussions, is to get the facts out. And there is a chance that the county will come to the table on this. I've had conversations with them where it's not, there's been confusion and lack of probably discussion. I think the county is open to helping with this. I think there's a potential for us to get much more from the state than just a match of the 3 million. So I think it's important that we listen to the citizens, we all work together as a team and try to make this a positive, because it is one-time money that we won't have again.
That's right.
Now, has Wagner contacted you all? I mean, 'cause you have all this information, the 72 study, all this stuff right here. Has Wagner contacted y'all to see?
We met initially here like everybody else did, and since then they did reach out and ask for the 71 study. We've shared that with them, but we haven't talked with them otherwise at this point.
Because it seems like they telling us, what you already know. Now they telling us to, do this. So do we really need to be paying them, more money to tell us something that you already know?
Well, I'll leave the room and y'all can have that discussion.
Yeah.
Right. I know. I'm just saying. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not asking you that person because I don't want them to come in on your competitor. But yeah.
Well, I think his point is that, they put a proposal in, but the council voted to bring Wagner
I
in.
understand that.
Now, what I think is that I think Wagner is trying to, because they've done this work in other areas prior to here, is that they're trying to work with the information that we have, but what they're telling us is, and Kevin and I have discussed this before, but too, a lot of our plans that we've had in the past didn't have a resource plan to go with them. They were a plan that ended up on the shelf. I think what we're trying to do now, and not pit each other against each other on this, but to focus on what we can potentially do with this. And I think there's strengths that y'all bring to this table for us. I think it's strengths that they bring to the table for us. And I think instead of pitting each other against each other, we need to try to work together to find solutions. And then at the end of the day, we decide how to move forward on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think, there's just been this conversation out in the community that Wagner's trying to take all this money from us. And I just don't think that's a fair assessment.
Wagner's getting $1.2 million before any work is even done.
No, that's not true. I mean,
Okay.
we'd have to go down that road with them before that happens.
Okay, but back to the updated comprehensive plan. I know, we brought up Light and Water Department about sewage, and we know that they need a comprehensive plan. So it looks like we should be working with the Light and Water Department and the city
Yes.
to get a comprehensive plan for everybody.
Yeah.
Opposed to, us just looking at, us and them looking at them,
Yeah, and you talk about collaboration. Light and Water has the ability to go out and reach out for ARPA funds as well. And I think that's important to have leverage and bring that money into this community also. But we had a meeting with the prior administration with Light and Water in the room, and that's where, everybody kind of brought their wish list and we threw it on the wall. And that's where that $50 million that I presented to y'all from Light and Water, that I think they've been discussed since then, came to the table, or the light at that time. Of course, City had their own request, but the final rule wasn't out. The final rule is still not out. I mean, there's still changes being made. I've heard as recent as today that there's potential that some of the planning that was originally going to be covered may not be covered, and so you just don't know. So until it comes out, and so a lot of agencies, state agencies, are still waiting. They haven't made their plans yet where they're going to go till that final rule is actually made. And I've also heard that obviously not all the money is going to be allocated and matched this year, and they're going to wait and do another second tranche potentially next year. You just don't know. So I don't think it's the last chance, and everybody's kind of hyperventilating right now to go get what they can get from the state. I think there's time. But there's no better time than the present as well. So.
And this is my last thing with I promise it is, because with $128 million projected of sewer work being did within 4 years, we're looking at potentially up to $36 million of matching money from the city. And realistically, I mean, like you said earlier, where I'm going with that. So how?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First off, the deadline of the money really is only for the ARPA. That can easily be spent within that deadline. I think all the other, $100 million that comes afterwards is a combination of probably getting money through, state funding and matching it against federal funding. And of course, those timelines are going to go well beyond ARPA. So that's in perpetuity. Y'all are always doing grants and continuing to get, matching dollars to go toward it from somewhere. Like right now, y'all are using potentially use funds to match against state funding. And so, of course, there will be, in my opinion, opportunities for federal funding to come down, which you can use state funding and local match funding against some of those grants. It's some of the conversation we had, remember, about Blue Cut, and when those grants come down, that we could use our use tax money and or maybe NDOT money to help leverage some of that. And so, again, to your point, it's not unrealistic. It's unrealistic in the time frame that you mentioned, but I don't think that time frame is tied to all that 1 million and 100 million and change, if you will. So that's the difference, I think.
My question, we talked about hiring privatizing the cleaning out the ditches. Would that fall under ARPA? Would maintenance of infrastructure fall under ARPA?
We would want to, that goes back to that risk, that you have to have assessed. But, well, you potentially could. And so, you'd be improving the ditch, upsizing the sizes of the ditches and increasing the flow and capacities and rehabilitating what is there. And under the rule that I remember reading at one point in time, that qualified. Final rule is not out, but I can't imagine how. Yeah, and so if you can, that's something that definitely you need to look into. But I think it would. And so, because again, you're upgrading or rehabilitating what's there. That's obviously right now you could prove is deficient through plenty of pictures and videos. But
whether we can get match or not, it still makes sense that that's 60 to 70% of our problem. It still makes sense to do this even without a match, opposed to trying to get a match to do something else that's not going to help the problem. So,
if y'all can help Public Works get ahead by doing a one-time good cleaning and truly commit the capital dollars it takes to keep them clean after that, you won't have to do that again. But I know that we've just gotten in a state of between manpower and equipment that just not getting where I know Casey wants it to be and his guys. And so this will be a great help to them. It's no different than y'all using the use funds to buy additional signage to help them get that better in the city. This is kind of the same difference, just coming from a different pot now. So
We'll get that started.
ASAP.
I think that's the highest on my priority. What we're leaving here today is getting that going.
I think it has to be on our agenda for us to vote to give him the okay to go out and start getting quotes and bids or whatever it takes to get it done. Since
yeah,
we're not
I
voting
definitely,
today. Yeah.
I definitely would want to work with Casey and his crew, and let's put something to put out there, and we can tell you before we go out to bid kind of what our thoughts are on that. So you kind of know what you're stepping into, because granted, whoever's going to get match funding needs to know that. Because that's important for them to know. You gotta have a dollar, you gotta have an ask, in other words. So if you come very vague, you're gonna get very vague answers back. So.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Kevin? Thank you, sir.
I appreciate
you being here.
Absolutely.
All right. Casey, could you come forward and give us kind of an idea of what some of the equipment needs are and with Public Works? You've talked about some of those with me in the department head meetings, and I just kind of wanted to kind of get that out in front of the council so they kind of see what y'all are dealing with.
First off, Mayor, I do want to appreciate Kevin for laying that out pretty clearly.
Yes, and you can talk about this as well too. Anything you want to add to it?
But for us, the equipment in Public Works Department, we have 4 pieces of equipment that that's actually running. We have a 323 that needs work on, which is $30-some thousand to get it back properly running. We have a 240 mini excavator. It does a little smaller ditches, and we have one John Deere backhoe and another JCB excavator, which is a 360. But those pieces of equipment is not enough. We constantly spending money on trying to keep them running and repairing, and I've been saying this for the longest, Mayor, that I just don't see putting money into something that we constantly put money when we can get something that will work and keep running. Same thing with our vehicles. I don't have the adequate vehicle just to get my guys around in the day-to-day work that we normally do for the city to get them around. Yeah, you've seen yourself, council, y'all seen some of the vehicles that we do have. These equipment and vehicles, things that we need in the department, just in order to keep everything running on a day-to-day basis, just to try to get get to one area to keep a ditch clean after we do. If this happen, get all these ditches cleared and clean. We still need equipment. We still need manpower just to keep these up. And that's my goal for the department, for the city, to keep some of these things cleared up so this city can function the way it's supposed to function for the infrastructure.
And so it's been difficult to have the budget at a level where you could replace the needed equipment and maintain it. I mean, there's never really been a priority list of the things you need to maintain and how often you need to change out the equipment, or?
I have ran it by the previous mayor, stuff that we do need for this department to try to keep it running. That have been laid out a couple of times. But the funds and the money that we seem to be faced with, and we don't have it, that hindering in my department. And I know we don't have it, the funds in my department, and have for the past, I know, 5 years now. My department, along with a couple other departments, have been taking decreases and cuts.
Yeah, I mean, even this year, we sat down and tried to figure out some priorities for equipment, because
Yes.
obviously equipment is a big expenditure, but a necessity for public works to be able to do their job adequately. The equipment that you've mentioned, any of that, would that have been helpful with the flooding stuff that we're dealing with now as far as cleaning?
Most definitely. We have the ditch Kevin mentioned about off 23rd here by the Brickyard. We had that equipment in there at least once this year to try to keep some of that drainage ditches open, to keep stuff from clogging up, which it's a very main drainage area in that area there.
So even if we're able to outsource some of this work to get these ditches clean, do you have the equipment that can maintain it?
Not at the present moment. Reason being, like I said, if right now with the 323, we did the ditch over here on 2nd. We had to go over there yesterday and clear that out, but that piece of equipment is walking on tracks, and Mr. Langford here, that's over maintenance garage, he knows that we continue to work with this equipment, which we needed.
Is that a tractor or a 323?
Yes, the excavator. It's the 323 excavator. That tracks on it, the left side, I think, is that right, Mr. Lee?
Yes.
The left side is keep walking, and if we keep working with this piece of equipment, we're gonna be out more money than the $30-some thousand just to get it repaired.
So I would think that it would be good to, as you're working with Kevin on coming back to the council on Tuesday with what it would take to outsource to get these ditches and stuff cleaned up, that we also have an idea of what it's gonna take to maintain them, where you are with equipment and what costs we're looking at to be able to, because if we're gonna spend the money to get them cleaned out, we need to be sure we can maintain them. Yes.
And we have compiled over the last year, did get a compiled list of all the open ditches that each and every one of you all wards 1 through 6. And I'm gonna give this compiled list to Kevin also so he can do, but we did get that taken care of.
And you have the capability of, say if you got a big project, would it make sense if you have equipment that's not working, instead of waiting on that equipment to get fixed, don't they have places that you can go rent something just for that day to finish that project?
Yes, but then there again too, also council, we spending money on some stuff that we can be using other ways, but sure, I mean, our RCS.
We could be using it somewhere else, but if we got that problem, then we need that problem fixed, then we
That's
gotta
true.
fix it. We can't just wait until we, go down the road,
That's true.
5 years from now and say, well, we're gonna wait till we get the equipment. I mean, if that's part of the option, then we need to start looking at that option sometime to make sure that everything is still flowing like it needs to flow.
To RCS, I know rents some equipment. Then also Thompson out there, the cat place, they also rent equipment. But like I said,
That would be good to add to what it would cost to rent that equipment. I think having all that in that assessment as we're looking at
I'm
it.
gonna go a step further. This big excavator you're talking about with the track running off, you're talking about replacing it instead of continuously fixing it? And what's the replacement cost on that particular equipment?
well, that one we paid council when we got it was $320,000. But we picked that machine up back here when we had tremendous work to do at the landfill, so it got some hours on it. But like I said, with $30,000 here, then you're talking about if you don't complete, give a whole undercarriage replacement, sooner or later something else gonna go wrong with that piece of equipment.
Have anybody in the department looking at grants to look at some of these?
No.
I mean, 'cause there's plenty of grants out there that we can be trying to look into to get some. Like I said, grants all depend on how you write them, and if we write them in the form of public safety, then I mean, hey, so we need to look at different avenues as well. Because $350,000, $330,000 for a piece of machinery, we need it,
And
but
Well, I'm looking at it a little bit further, saying at $350,000, and that might be on the low end.
right.
How many times can we pay a private guy with his own tractor to come clean that ditch out?
You end up in the hole, council, because of the open ditches that I think that we have in the city of Columbus, trying to pay someone to constantly come in here and redo those ditches. I think, we end up in a hole. I mean, here's the thing with a heavy piece of equipment. Sure, we're gonna spend the money out first, but if we're gonna spend that money, we have a piece of equipment that's gonna last. I mean, this equipment that we had here, we done had it, 13 years, 14 years. After you get 6 or 7 years on a good piece of equipment that you're constantly using on a day-to-day basis, 7 years, it's time to try to swap it out, sell it, and get something else. And that's where we're at. After you've been and got the wear and tear on it, we constantly start getting to the point where we're spending money to keep it running.
And that's the thing we talk about as far as trying to have a capital plan, thank you. Having a capital plan where we're proactively thinking about these issues before they are upon us. That just like replacing fire trucks, police cars, all those things, same thing for public works. This equipment's gonna have to be, and that's what we have to be trying to work towards, making sure we're planning for that.
You have a wish list.
Yes,
Can you get us a copy of your wish list?
I sure can.
Any other questions? Any other comments?
All these are important. Is there anything that's absolute urgent? I mean, we're shut down without it kind of thing?
That,
I didn't,
the 323 excavator.
and that's where's that to do? Is that the ditch?
That's the
part?
ditch, and then we also do our demos. When we demo our houses, that piece of equipment is used there also. So it's one piece of the main major equipment that we have.
And is that the 350 you just?
323 excavator.
No, I'm talking about the price.
Yes, actually 320,000 that we paid for it back then.
It's gonna be a lot more than that.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate you very much. Thank you for.
Okay, man.
Okay, now we want to just briefly touch on the Airbnb policy that we've been discussing. How are you, sir?
Good morning to everybody. The City of Columbus Planning Commission considered a Airbnb request in January of this year and again in February. And they did put together a policy, or at least a recommendation of a policy that will be brought to you and the rest of the council at the first meeting on March the 1st. The recommendation will include the definition of a short-term rental, the amended definition of the existing bed and breakfast, and where Airbnbs should and should not be allowed based on the zoning districts. So I don't know if I should get into the specifics at this time, since it hadn't officially been approved by you and the council.
Can you give us a copy of it so we can look over it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you need to do this in March instead of next Tuesday, because it just wasn't enough time to.
No, it's on next Tuesday's agenda.
March is that in March?
It's almost here.
Man, time flies, doesn't it? Not bad. You're right.
It's on next Tuesday's agenda. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Kenny, while you're there, we had mentioned with this Airbnb, and I'm sure it's gonna come up with the one in North Haven Woods that we have to address, and what what y'all's recommendation was. And somebody said, well, if you look on Airbnb, there's 70 of them in Columbus. And that number can be skewed, one, that everybody that's got a Columbus address is not in the city of Columbus, for one.
Correct.
And I'm talking to you, you mentioned the fact that even though it might be in the city of Columbus, you don't know where it is. You can't go and try to figure out what house is being rented because we don't even know what the address is until you rent the house. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. You don't actually get the physical address until you book the site. So I'm not sure exactly how we're gonna reach out to these property owners to advise them, at this point. As far as the 70,
What now? You can't see the address?
that's, so,
No, they let you know exactly where you're staying at before you book with Airbnb. It tells you exactly where you're staying at.
well, maybe I need to reach out to you for.
Oh, okay. I'm staying at one soon, so.
Okay.
Here in town?
No, my
What we looked at locally was, and it maybe there's another website or something, what we looked at locally, you weren't provided the address until you booked it. They gave you some pictures, and a lot of the pictures were actually downtown areas that we see. So, and as far as the 70, what we found is that's probably more like around 30 within the city limits. Okay? Okay. Go.
Thank you. Jeff, you said there was one thing you wanted to bring to our attention too.
Yeah, it's probably, could wait till the meeting, but it's fairly substantial, so it's gonna be a lot of legalese involved, but I was supposed to have from Butler Snow the, term sheet for the revenue bond from the Light and Water Department that y'all approved them to go ahead with. The placement agent agreement and other substantive bond documents. I haven't received them yet. They're supposed to be in my email today. And the request is to put them on the March 1, this Tuesday's agenda. Then it'll go through a bunch of steps, assuming y'all approve that before the final closing of the bond, which will be up in April. That's all I want.
Any questions on that, Council? Well, let me say I want to thank each member of the council for being here today. I know it's everybody's busy and it's hard to carve out time for these meetings, but I think they're very helpful for our citizens. And I know that it's not always easy for everybody to be here, but these are recorded. They're on Facebook, and so the council members who can't attend can always go watch them before the council meetings and have discussions if necessary. With that, saying thank you to everybody and to all the folks from the city and the media that's here, we'll close the meeting. Thank you.